Okay, I'm going to begin. And since our internet is unstable, I'm using my mobile network. So if it fails in the middle, please try to connect it back again, because I may have to re-log in if there is a problem. Okay, are there questions? Okay, if not, let me begin. Okay. So we have been studying nucleosynthesis. So what I'll do today is to begin by describing some aspects of the numerical analysis.
Hello, sir.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Sir, I have a confusion which I want to clear. Sir, like when we are talking about the other nuclei other than helium,
Yes.
sir, then how to find the like density of deuterium, like comparison of reaction rate or the expansion rate, which must below to one, then we can find the. I'm
Yeah,
confusing.
yeah, it's roughly that. So today I'm going to discuss this a little bit better. Okay.
Okay.
But if you want the accurate value, then one should do numerical analysis, right? Which I'll start with first, and then I'll describe an approximate procedure, right? I mean, I'll basically try to explain what I said yesterday or last time, how to determine the density of deuterium. Okay, so I think it will become clear as we proceed with this lecture.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Okay, any other question? Okay, so let me then begin. So we want to describe some aspects of the numerical analysis. Okay, how exactly this is done. Okay, so first of all, you notice that these variables, okay, lambda t, t of t, and t nu of t, these can be determined independently of the nucleosynthesis analysis, okay, because these are determined from the following considerations. So first of all, you have energy conservation. Or equivalently, entropy conservation. Then you have Friedmann equation. And you also have this relation that T nu is proportional to 1 over lambda after decoupling. Okay, and we have seen in detail how to determine the time evolution of these. Okay, and the idea is that because the number of baryons is very small, okay, as I said, it's 1 in 10 to the 9, okay, baryons per photon. Okay, they will have very little effect on the evolution of these. Okay, so these can be determined first without worrying about the baryons at all. Okay, so this is not affected by nucleosynthesis. Then we can determine NBT, total number of baryons. So this is given by omega b over mp380 square over 8 pi g. So this is the critical density. Okay, so we took the critical density multiplied by the baryon fraction that we observed today, divided by the mass of the proton to get the number of protons or number of baryons, and then we have to go back in time. So T of t over T0 Q. So this determines NB of t. So there is no problem there. Okay. And then we have to calculate NIs. Okay. This is the number density of the ith nuclei. Number density of ith nucleus. Okay. And this includes P and N. Okay, and all the heavy nuclei, deuterium, helium 3, hydrogen 3, helium 4, and so on. And you have this condition that the total number, sum over NiAi, is NB. Right? Ai, you remember, it's a number of protons plus neutrons in the nucleus. Protons plus neutrons in the nucleus. So now we can set up the equation. So d dt of ni lambda cube. As we have seen that this is given by the rate of production. Rate of production minus rate of destruction of ith type nucleus. Okay. So rate of production we calculate by looking at all processes which has the ith type nucleus in the final state. Right? Those all contribute to the production of these nuclei, and the rate of destruction corresponds to all processes which have ith type nucleus in the initial state. Okay. And the idea is that once you know the cross sections and the densities of various other kinds of nuclei, okay, we can calculate the right hand side, okay, and write down a set of equations for this ni lambda cube. Okay. And in fact, it's easier to write down an equation for yi. So we define yi equal to ni over nb. Okay. And the idea is that since nb lambda cube is constant, we can divide both sides by nb lambda cube and take 1 over nb lambda cube inside the derivative. So this gives you an equation of the form, or a set of equations of the form dyi dt is equal to some function of all the other y's, yk, and time. Okay, why time? Because after all, the lambda, the temperature, okay, all of which enters this formula, okay, they depend on time, right? But those have already been determined. Okay. So you have a set of equations dyi dt equal to some function of yk and t, and these functions are known. Okay, that's the important point. Okay. And so now the idea is that you simply have to numerically evolve this, okay, and see what you get. Okay. And the asymptotic values of the yi's will give the relic density, right? That's the way the numerical evolution is done. Is this clear? Any question? Okay. So let me also say about initial conditions, okay, because these are first order differential equations. We have to put the initial condition for each yi. Okay. So you can set the initial condition, for example, at a temperature of order MeV. Okay. So in this case, okay, yi's are almost 0 for the heavy nuclei D, H3, He, 3, He4, etc. Okay. And the Yn and Yp given by the thermal equilibrium values. Okay, so you can start there. Okay, in fact, you can even put it a little bit above MeV. Right? Maybe you can set it greater than MeV. Okay, so that everything is in thermal equilibrium, and you can calculate Yn and Yp by the thermal equilibrium values, and then you start evolving the system. Okay, including all the reactions that are taking place. Okay. So this is the way you can set up the analysis. Okay. And what I'll do now, okay, is to give some qualitative understanding of what exactly happens during this evolution, okay, from what you have already learned. Right? We learned something based on the statistical mechanics analysis, okay, where we assume certain things that this instantaneous thermal equilibrium and so on. Okay. But we can ask, what do those things imply for this numerical evolution? Can we guess how things will evolve numerically, okay, from what the analysis that you have already done? Okay, and that's what we'll try to do. Okay. So the general rule is that the yi's will try to approach the thermal equilibrium values. Try to approach and indeed at equilibrium, the rate of production of yi should match the rate of destruction of yi's. Okay, and that's how yi remains in equilibrium. Okay. And we have seen this in one example of this proton-neutron, the neutrino system, right? Where you saw that if, for example, T nu and T were equal, okay, which is the case of thermal equilibrium, then whether you solve the detail balance equation, namely dx and dt equal to 0, okay, or whether you just solve the whether you just evolve it using the analogs of these equations, thermal equilibrium always gives the same value. Okay, so at thermal equilibrium, the rate of production and rate of destructions are the same. So this means that if yi is a little larger than its equilibrium value, then it will tend to reduce. If it's a little less than the equilibrium value, then it will tend to increase. Okay. But what happens is that if the reaction rates are slow, if the reaction rates are slow to establish thermal equilibrium, then YITs do not quite have their equilibrium values. So with this understanding, let's see what we can say about how the system will evolve. So now, as you have seen, that between 1 MeV and say 10 to the 9K, right? 10 to the 9K is what, 0.86 MeV. Okay. Sorry, 0.086 MeV. Okay. That's how like roughly 0.1 MeV. So between this, okay, the PN D gamma system is in equilibrium, is in thermal equilibrium. But the heavier nuclei are not. Okay. And the reason is that the number density of D that we get from this equilibrium calculation, okay, is so low that the heavier nuclear production, which is D plus D going into either helium-3 or hydrogen-3, okay, plus another nucleon, okay, proton or neutron, okay, that process is not in equilibrium, right? That process is too slow. Okay. So in this range, what we expect that the densities of P, N, and D of P, N, D are given by their equilibrium value for given temperature, which is of course a function of time, and xn of t. Okay, this is something that you specify. So this is calculated from previous table. Okay. So during this time, okay, this of course is not an equilibrium result, okay, because this we had to do numerical analysis to find xn as a function of time, okay, because the neutron proton, the weak interaction is not in thermal equilibrium. Okay. But given these data, T of T and Xn of T, okay, the strong interactions involving, or not strong, the electromagnetic interaction that involves the P and D gamma conversions to each other, okay, that's in thermal equilibrium. Okay. So you expect that the numerical evolution will give the values of P, N, and D densities that are compatible with the equilibrium values. Is this clear? Okay, so this is what you should expect from the numerical analysis. Then what happens is that at T of order 10 to the 9k, 10 to the 9k, the density of deuteron becomes large enough to bring the heavier nuclei under equilibrium. Okay, and here there's some subtle point, and that's we should understand, and that's what is going to eventually determine the Rayleigh deuteron density. So let me try to do this a little carefully. So at T of order 10 to the 9k, okay, ND becomes large enough. Okay, let me say it again. So ND is large enough for equilibrium, assuming, okay, and this is important, that PND gamma system for, let me here, I should add full equilibrium, right? Which means also including the heavier nuclei. So this is large enough for full equilibrium, assuming that the PND gamma system is in equilibrium. But others are not. Okay. So this is important because when we assume that the P and D gamma system is in equilibrium, right, we got some value of ND. But if we assume that the P and D gamma together with the helium-3, hydrogen-3 and helium-4 are in equilibrium, then the value of ND that we get in equilibrium is very, very tiny, right? And it's very, very tiny because you remember that we found that NN is of order 10 to the minus 48. And ND has this factor of NN times NP times other things. Right? So because of this 10 to the minus 48, basically everything becomes very, very tiny. Okay, the equilibrium values of everything becomes very, very tiny except helium-4. Okay. So now you see that there is a tension. Okay. Namely that if we assume that only this system is in equilibrium, then ND becomes large enough. Okay. But if we assume that the whole system is in equilibrium, then ND is very tiny, and this is not enough to establish equilibrium. Okay. So let's then translate to what we should expect based on this analysis for the numerical evolution. So what we should expect that as T reaches 10 to the 9, okay, ND becomes larger, and it reaches a value that is close to the one that gives the equilibrium value, assuming this. But once it reaches that critical value, then it starts producing the heavier elements. as it starts producing the heavier elements, the ND drops. But once ND drops, then of course the heavier element production stops. Okay. So effectively, what's going to happen is that the ND will remain more or less the same, okay, at that critical value. Okay. And as more and more deuteron is produced from the proton-neutron fusion, okay, that gets converted to the heavier nuclei very fast, because that's what the equilibrium tells us, right? It should approach the equilibrium values, and the heavier nuclei, in particular the helium-4, has much larger equilibrium value than what it would be at this stage, where you have assumed that there is no helium-4 at all. Okay, because only the p and d gamma system is in equilibrium. Okay. So the net result will be the ND will remain more or less stationary at that critical value. Okay. And helium-4, okay, through helium-3 and hydrogen-3, eventually helium-4 will start getting formed, okay, approaching its equilibrium value. Okay. And this will stop. So this process, so ND will remain more or less stationary. More or less constant at this critical value. Till all the ends are exhausted. All the free neutrons are exhausted and effectively gone into He4. So after this, what will happen? So after this, you see, ND is still much larger than the equilibrium value of ND, right? Because of this tiny number. Okay. So ND will begin to fall. Okay. But once ND falls below this critical value, then of course the system goes out of equilibrium, heavier nuclei don't form anymore. So ND, after this, ND will fall a bit. But eventually ND lambda cube gets frozen to this critical value. Is this point clear? Okay. So this is the result, right? We saw that there is some critical value of ND at which nucleosynthesis will begin. Okay, at t equal to 10 to the 9. Then the nucleosynthesis happens very fast. And during that process, the neutrons get first converted to ND, but almost immediately it goes into the heavier nuclei, eventually ending up at helium-4. And once the neutrons get exhausted, this process stops. ND falls a little bit below, but once it falls a little bit below the critical density, it gets frozen, right? Because now the interactions have gone out of equilibrium. So this is what we expect from our statistical analysis, and this is what we actually see in the numerical analysis. Okay, and I mean, it's a good exercise. If you are willing to do some numerical analysis, then it's a good exercise to do this calculation and check that indeed this qualitative understanding of how the various systems, how the various numbers evolve, okay, follow this pattern.
Sir?
Yes, go ahead, please.
If you could go back to the set of equations that you had written.
This one?
Yeah.
Yes.
So here we have to encode it separately, right? That ND remains constant after 10 to the 9.
No. Here, if you use these equations, then everything will be nothing. You don't have to encode anything. Right? You will just solve these equations.
But the reason ND is staying constant is because the output rate has fallen below the evolution rate.
Yeah, but that will be part of this FIs, no?
Will it be? Because I think we calculated that separately.
No, but once you use the numerical, the full set of equations, right? It will tell us precisely when dy dt will be very small, right?
When in the last class, when you wrote down those solutions, that was the solution for the full set of equation, right?
Yes, but that was an approximate solution, assuming this intermediate thermal equilibrium, right?
So you are
But
saying that
suppose you
Fi
don't
is
want
not
to use
the
thermal equilibrium at all, okay? You just evolve the whole system by numerical analysis. Then
But
you are
then
not making any approximation at any stage. Okay? Then these equations should capture everything. Because Fi knows about the densities, right? Relic densities. The fact that the Fi's will become small, right? I mean, what is this saying? That this is saying that the dNd dt or dyd dt is equal to the depletion rate, right? Now, how is deuteron getting depleted? Because d plus d collision produces this heavier nuclei. But once Nd falls, right, that will show up here that appropriate Y has fallen, and then this Fi will become small, and this will become small, dy dt.
so you're saying that in last class, when we took Fi to be the equilibrium distribution function, then we got those results.
Exactly.
And in general, what do we take them to be?
In general, you
Just the
calculate them, right? From this rate
in
of
terms
production
of the
minus rate
cross
of
section.
yeah, you use the cross sections and calculate this.
Okay.
Right? That's the way you set up this equation. So if you actually calculate the cross sections, and of course you also need the temperature, right? Because these cross sections depend on the number densities. The cross sections don't depend on temperature, but the number densities which are involved in the rate of production, they do depend on the temperature or lambda. So those have to be taken into account. But I'm assuming that the time dependence of the temperature or lambda, that is not affected by this. That is already given to you from the previous analysis. And then you just use these equations. Okay, and in these equations, you also use the neutron evolution equation. So you don't even separately consider the xns, right? You put that also as part of this on the right hand side. Okay,
Yeah.
the fact that the neutron can get converted to proton and vice versa, which is the weak interaction effect, that also you put in here. And you evolve weak, strong electromagnetic interaction, everything together. And that is important because if you think of the Xn evolution equation as separate, right? Then it will tell us that Xn will continue to decrease, right? Because the neutrons are going to decay. Okay. But you know that eventually the fraction of neutrons is not going to decrease because once they get bound to the helium, then they don't decay anymore. Okay. So if in this equation you put all those reactions together, right? The neutron proton conversion via these weak interaction processes and the electromagnetic and strong interactions, everything, then you have everything, right? Then you just evolve them using these equations.
Yeah.
It's just that from these equations, you don't have a physical understanding or a qualitative understanding of what happens. And that's why you go through the statistical analysis. Okay, but if you want the actual numbers and compare with experiments, then this is what one should really do. Is this clear? Okay. Any other question? Okay.
Sir?
So at this stage, in fact, also the others get frozen.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, please.
To know the exact number of protons and neutrons, we also have to know the exact temperature at which these neutrinos got frozen out, right?
Not really, because as long as they got frozen out sufficiently above MeV, right? Then from then onwards, the T nu, we can, T nu continues to go as 1 over lambda.
I mean, if this phasing out was around 1 mega electron volt.
Yes.
So, and the difference between neutrons and protons mass is also of the order of 1 mega electron volt.
Yes, that's true.
So if we make any change in this the temperature at which this neutrinos got frozen out,
Yes.
then the numerical values of n and p would be quite different, right?
Not really, because if you look at the time evolution of t nu over t, right? T nu over t remains more or less close to 1 even at MeV, right? Because see the T nu over T, so as long as T nu and, okay, maybe I should put it this way, that freezing out of the neutrinos, right, really do not have any effect till the photon temperature goes above the neutrino temperature, right? Because that's where you start seeing the difference, right? As long as T nu and T are almost equal, there's no difference. So why does photon temperature go above the neutrino temperature? And that happens when the E plus E minus starts becoming non-relativistic, right? Because the entropy is getting transferred from the E plus E minus system to gamma system. That happens below MeV, okay, after the neutrinos have frozen out. So if you look at the T nu over T ratio, right, it remains more or less close to 1, around 1 MeV, and it starts becoming larger than 1 below 1 MeV. Right?
Okay.
So that really doesn't affect things very much.
Okay.
Right? Because it's this which is important, right? Even if neutrinos are decoupled at 1 MeV, right? The temperatures are falling in the same way, right? T nu and T are almost equal.
So electron positron decouple at one small MeV, right? Like milli electron volt.
No, we are not talking about decoupling. We are talking about them becoming non-relativistic.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, non-relativistic.
Right? That's about E plus E minus, the masses are about 0.5 MeV. So around that, the T nu over T ratio starts deviating from 1. And that you have to calculate, and that we did calculate, right? I mean, we wrote down the first table that I showed you is basically how T nu over T evolves with time or temperature, right? And that's based on the entropy conservation. So if you look at that table, you will find that T nu over T is almost equal to 1 at 1 MeV, but then it starts, that T nu over T starts falling below 1 as the temperature comes down. But that table is well known, and that you have to put in these equations, right? Because these equations do depend on all this, right? Here we have seen that the weak interaction, for example, right, the proton neutron conversion, that FIs will depend on the T nu, right? Because whether the neutrino state is occupied or not makes a difference, okay, whether final state or initial state. But that T nu over T you pick from the table that you have found earlier, because that table is not affected by nucleosynthesis, right? The number of nucleons is too small to affect the dynamics of neutrinos or photons at this stage. So plug that in this expression for Fi, right? That enters the expression for Fi, right? And that's why this time dependence is complicated in general, because T nu over T has complicated time dependence. But all that information can be put in numerically.
Okay.
Is that clear? Are there other questions?
Sir, generally I want to ask, sir, what's the duration of nucleosynthesis, like the neutron is coupled to deuterium or other heavy nuclei?
Yeah, so duration of nucleosynthesis is basically between 10 to the 9K and 0.75 times 10 to the 9K. Everything happens, right? So roughly you can say major events occur within a temperature range of plus minus 10%.
Okay. Okay, sir.
So those things don't change very much, right? That's why nucleosynthesis predictions are reasonably robust.
Okay. Okay, sir.
Any other question? Okay, so let me, so here ND gets frozen, okay. And what I was going to say is that at this stage, the other processes like H3 plus D going to He4, let's see, He4 plus what in this case? This is this is 2 protons, so plus neutron, or He3 plus D goes to He4 plus proton. Okay. These also fall out of equilibrium. And basically NH3 lambda cube, NHE3 lambda cube, NHE4 lambda cube, everything gets frozen. Okay. So let me give the values that one determines. Okay, we had already seen the ratio of hydrogen to helium. Okay. So results. Okay, and again, as I said, if you are willing to do some numerical analysis, you should try to verify them by running the computer program. Okay. Then Nd over NH. Okay, then this is a hydrogen molecule, that's hydrogen nucleus. That's about 2.57 plus or minus 0.03 times 10 to the minus 5. Okay. And the other one is a NH3 plus NHE3 over NH is about 1.1 plus or minus 0.2 times 10 to the minus 5. Okay. So here I have written the sum of NH3 plus NHE3 because as we discussed last time, okay, the H3 essentially decays to He3. Okay, later we have a half-life of 12 years. So today, if you want to observe, if you want to compare it what you observe today, both H3 and He3 that was produced primordially will appear as He3. Okay, that's why I have just added them, and that's the number. That's the kind of number that we get. Are there questions? Okay, so now let me describe some inferences. Okay, what can nucleosynthesis teach us? Some inferences from nucleosynthesis. Okay. So the first one I have already discussed earlier. Okay, but let me do it again. So we calculated this ratio, right? Rho He over rho H. And we saw that this is essentially determined by Xn at the time of nucleosynthesis, right? This is the time of nucleosynthesis. And the small error in the temperature, right? That's about 10% error, uncertainty in the temperature means 20% uncertainty in T, right? That translates to some small uncertainty in this ratio, right? 4% or something. Okay. So this is determined by requiring T of order 10 to the 9k, right? Because that's where you saw that the deuterium density increases to the critical value. Okay, basically that's where the bottleneck is removed. Now suppose the universe had extra light decoupled particles at the time of nucleosynthesis. Okay. So there could be some light particles that you haven't observed till today, and imagine that those light particles were nearly massless, meaning their energies are that their masses are small compared to the MeV scale, okay? But they decoupled somewhere early. Okay, there could be another extra neutrino, for example, or there may be some other light particle which decoupled much earlier. Okay. So the effect of all these will be to contribute to rho. Right, and they will basically follow the same formula. Okay, half AB times the temperature, that relevant temperature to the 4, and times the number of degrees of freedom, and then multiply by 7/8 if it's a light fermion, for example. Okay. So they contribute to rho, okay, and this means that they increase lambda dot over lambda. So what does this mean? This means faster expansion. So 10 to the 9K is reached at smaller t, right? Because faster expansion means you take less time for lambda to come down, so that temperature reaches 10 to the 9K. But if t is smaller, that means what? That means that effectively the neutrons had less time to decay, right? Because larger t is, the less the number of neutrons, right? So at smaller t means larger xn, and this gives larger rho h over a rho h. So the fact that the observed rho h over rho h, right? We saw that this is about what, 23 to 27 to 73, right? And this matches quite well with what we observed. And this basically tells us that we don't have much space to play around with. Okay? We cannot simply postulate that there are other light particles, okay, which are decoupled earlier and which are present at the time of Big Bang nucleosynthesis, because if it did happen, okay, they would actually increase the ratio of helium in the universe. And this was basically used in the early days to put a bound on the number of neutrinos, right? I mean, one could in fact show that you could accommodate at most one extra neutrino, okay, within error bar, but you couldn't accommodate more than one extra neutrino, okay, because one extra neutrino will increase the expansion rate, okay, but just about as much as you can tolerate. And in fact, one of your homework problem involves a similar problem, right, where a light particle decoupled much earlier. Is this clear? Are there questions?
So,
Yes.
people still propose that, I mean, there are other flavors of neutrinos, right?
Yes, they propose, but the point is they have to be heavier. They have to be heavier than 1 MeV at the time of nucleosynthesis, so that they have become not, so that their densities have already gotten depleted earlier.
Okay.
Right? As we have seen that if for example the decoupling happens when they are non-relativistic, then there's no problem, right? Because then the number of decreases exponentially. The relic densities decrease exponentially. So that's what has to happen if there are other neutrinos.
Okay.
So this gives bound on particle physics, but it comes from cosmology, right? That because particle physics in a sense controls cosmology, and if you change the particle physics data, okay, then it affects cosmology in a way that sometimes it's incompatible with what we have seen. Okay, so let me now say a few words about the lessons from YD. Lessons from YD, okay, which is ND over NB. Okay, so let's remember how ND and NB are determined. So ND, recall that. Okay, I mean, of course, the exact determination will require numerical analysis, but roughly we can determine ND from this equation, right? ND sigma D V over lambda dot over lambda of order 1. Okay. So sigma D or the cross section for D plus D going to either H3 plus P or He3 plus N. Okay. So ND, let me write a formula for ND. So ND will be 1 over sigma dV. This is of course just a number, right? Sigma, we saw that sigma dV is given by some fixed number, right, which you can read out, but this is just some, you don't have a, there's no adjustable thing here. Lambda dot over lambda, let me write, is 8 pi G over 3 over 3. And here I'll write as T to the 4, sorry, let me, half AB T to the 4. And then the photon contribution is 2 and the neutrino contribution is 7/8 times 6 times T nu by T to the 4. Right? This is at the time of nucleosynthesis. NB on the other hand, we can estimate. So this is 1 over MP, right? We are multiplying, we are dividing by MP because here we will calculate the energy density or mass density, okay, or energy density of the baryons, and that's given by 380 square over 8 pi G. This is a critical density times omega B times T over T naught cube. Is that clear? Right? This is the mass density of baryons. Sorry, this is the mass density of baryons today. We divide by MP to calculate the number density of baryons today. And then we multiply by T over T naught cube to calculate the number density of baryons at the time that you are interested in. So the main point I want to emphasize here, so this equation determines ND over NB, right? Because everything is given. But this basically tells us that YD, which is the fraction of deuteron, ND over NB, is proportional to 1 over omega B. So YD is sensitively dependent on omega B. So knowing YD, we can determine omega B. Right? Even if you didn't know what the total amount of baryon is in the universe, okay? If you could calculate, for example, the ratio of the deuteron to hydrogen in some part of the universe where it has not been polluted by, say, stars, then you can use that to determine omega B. Okay. And omega B is 0.04 is compatible with this. Is compatible with observed YD. But for example, it couldn't be that all the dark matter is baryonic, right? That would definitely be not compatible with YD. Okay. So this itself can put constraints, okay, on what fraction of the of matter is actually baryonic. Okay, that you cannot simply declare everything to be baryonic, which are hidden somehow from us. Is this clear? Okay, so let me now say something about the heavier nuclei. It turns out that there is a trace element of heavier nuclei also, which are produced at this time during the Big Bang. Okay. And those basically come from the following reactions. If you take helium-3 plus helium-4, they can go into beryllium-7 plus gamma, and helium-3 plus helium-4 can also go to lithium-7 plus gamma. Okay. So these are electromagnetic and hence slow. Electromagnetic. And hence slow. Okay, so these are not produced in equilibrium, but if you follow the numerical analysis by including these also in the game, then you will find that there is a trace element of these which are produced. And again, when you try to compare the experiments, what happens is that this eventually they form atoms, right? By capturing electrons. They form atoms by capturing electrons. And an atomic beryllium-7 can decays to lithium-7 by electron capture. Okay, which is basically B7 plus E minus goes to lithium-7 plus neutrino. Okay, so the weak interaction, it's slow, but it doesn't matter as long as the lifetime is less than the lifetime of the universe. Right? What's going to happen is that all the beryllium-7 that was produced during this process will show up today as lithium-7. Okay, so just like we added H3 plus He3 to calculate the total relic density of He3, we have to add the beryllium-7 and the lithium-7 numbers to calculate the total abundance of lithium-7. Okay. And this gives the lithium-7 density YLi of order 10 to the minus 10. Okay, so it's really tiny. Okay, much smaller than the deuteron and the helium-3 densities. Are there questions? So it turns out that basically the primordial nucleosynthesis stops here. And the reason, okay, is the following. Okay, you can ask, for example, that since the final composition is mainly P and He4, one could consider processes of the following kind. Say P plus He4 going to some nucleus with A equal to 5 plus other stuff, right? E plus minus gamma, etc., depending on what nucleus it is, or He4 plus He4 going to some nucleus with A equal to 8, and then again plus E plus minus or gamma. But it turns out that there are no stable nucleus. There is no stable nucleus with A equal to 5 or 8. And the reason is because of the large binding energy of the helium. Okay, in fact, the helium, in the binding energy per nucleon, is one of the highest in the helium in this region. Okay, for among the light nuclei. Okay, and so if we have a nucleus with A equal to 5, it could actually decay into proton plus helium 4 or neutron plus helium 4 by the reverse process. Okay, and that's what happens. Okay, because energetically this will have, I mean, this will have more energy than the sum of the masses of these two. Okay, simply because helium 4 has a very large binding energy. Okay, and the same argument is true here. Okay, the reason that there is no stable nucleus of A equal to 8 is because it just splits up into 2 helium 4s because these have large binding energy. Okay, so these processes don't occur. Okay, and because of the same reason, even this is not allowed. Okay, if you take, you could imagine that you can have helium 4 plus helium 4 okay, going to either a lithium plus a proton or a beryllium plus a neutron. Okay, but these are also not allowed. Okay, these are not allowed due to energy consideration. So basically what happens is that the helium has about a binding energy of about 28 MeV, right? So 2 helium 4 will have a total binding energy of 56 MeV. So that means that it's 56 MeV lower than the sum of the masses of the constituents. Whereas lithium binding energy is only about 39 MeV, right? So the sum of the masses of lithium plus proton is larger than the sum of the masses of helium 4 plus helium 4. Okay, and because they are nearly non-relativistic, okay, there is no way that you can produce lithium plus proton in the collision of 2 helium 4s. Okay, so that's why lithium is not produced by these processes either. Okay, it has to be produced by the helium 3 helium 4 collision. Okay, so anything above lithium that we see in the universe is produced in the stars. That happens, of course, much later. So primordial nucleosynthesis, okay, produces elements up to lithium. And as you saw, their numbers can be calculated just from particle physics data. Okay, it's in fact cleaner than later production of various elements which require a lot of details about the star formation and so on, the evolution of the stars. Okay, are there questions? Okay, so this is as much as I'll say about nucleosynthesis. We now move forward. So we now move forward in time.
Sir,
Yes, go ahead, please.
sir, in the nucleosynthesis, like we have discussed neutrinos. So, sir, they are massless. They are massless, sir.
Yeah, you can consider the neutrinos to be massless at that scale. Right? Even though neutrinos we know have mass, right? That mass doesn't affect anything at that scale. So you can regard them as massless because you're talking about 1 MeV energies, right? And the sum of the masses of all the neutrinos, I think, is less than 0.1 electron volt.
And also, is there no concept of Majorana or Waltz fermions also?
Yeah, again, I mean, you can just use the standard model neutrinos for that for this purpose.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about whether they're Majorana or Waltz simply because of this fact that the masses don't really matter.
Okay, sir.
Any other question? Okay, so we'll now move forward in time. Okay. And see what other interesting things happen, okay, before the last scattering, because as I said, this course is going to end at last scattering and then we're going to go backward in time. So first, the photons go out of equilibrium. Okay, we'll discuss these one by one go out of equilibrium. We'll see when it happens. Then the universe goes from radiation to matter dominated. This we have already discussed before, but now we can do a little better job because you know that the radiation contains also neutrinos, right? And you know precisely what the temperature of the neutrinos is. So we'll put that in. Then the electrons will bind to the helium ions, right? Because helium, of course, we produce as nucleus. And then at some point, okay, the electrons start binding to helium. Okay, so it first produces helium plus with one singly ionized helium, and then ultimately the helium atom. And then finally, E minus binds to proton. Okay. So this part we will not discuss very much because this analysis is similar to this. Okay. And there is really no direct observable consequence of this in our universe today. Okay. But this one, as we have discussed, and we will discuss it in a little more detail later, okay, is important because this is the time. Okay, at this time, the universe becomes transparent. So the CMB today gives an image of the universe at this time. Okay. So we'll start with this because as you'll see that this happens first. Okay, that when do photons go out of equilibrium? Now we have seen that when T is much less than 0.5 MeV, most of the E pluses are gone. But the extra E minuses remain. So N E minus, will write a better formula for this, but it's roughly 10 to the minus 9 times N gamma, right? That's what you have seen because number of electrons is more or roughly the same as the number of baryons. So this is a small number. Okay. But nevertheless, since E minus gamma scattering is electromagnetic scattering, it has reasonably large cross section. And the photons can be kept in thermal equilibrium by this scattering. And the question you are asking is that when does this stop? Okay, is this question clear?
So what do you mean by E plus disappears?
Basically, we had written down this formula for, if you remember, we wrote down the formula for Ne minus and Ne plus, okay, at temperatures way below the equilibrium scale, and it had some factor of e to the minus Me minus mu over T, and this had times things, and this had e to the minus Me plus mu over T times something. And what we had seen is that because when T is much less than Me, right, one of these have to be small, right? And which one is small is controlled by whether there is a excess E minus or excess E plus. Okay. So for example, if there is excess E minus, which is the case in our universe, right, then what's going to happen is that as T falls, mu has to approach close to Me, okay, so that this number doesn't go way below 10 to the minus 9. But that means that mu is approaching Me. So this number is roughly e to the minus 2 Me over T. Right? And that becomes very, very small. Right? So that's what I mean by saying that the almost all the E pluses disappear. Okay, I got a message saying that the internet connection is unstable. Is it okay? Can you hear?
Yeah, we lost you for a minute, but
Okay, so what I was going to say, what I said is the following, that here are the formula for Ne minus and Ne plus, right? The non-relativistic formula. And you can see from here that when T becomes much smaller than Me, right, either Ne minus or Ne plus have to be small, right? Because the product of these has e to the minus 2 Me over T, right? And that can be a very small suppression factor. So the idea is that as T falls, okay, mu has to go sufficiently close to Me so that this number remains close to 10 to the minus 9, right? Because that's what Ne minus over N gamma is, right? So this number cannot fall too much below 10 to the minus 9. But that means that this number now is in fact very, very small, because if mu is close to Me, then this is roughly to the minus 2 Me over T. And when T is much smaller than 0.5 MeV, then this number is very, very small. And this is what always happens, right? When the temperature goes below the mass of the particle, if there is no excess, then both go to 0, right? If there is no excess, then mu is 0, and e to the minus Me by T goes to 0 as T falls. Okay, so both become very small. But if there is an excess, then of course both cannot become very small. But one of them remains constant when it falls as 1 over lambda cube, that's the excess. But the other one becomes very, very small. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what I meant by saying that E plus is almost disappeared. Okay, because here the excess we know is an E minus.
Okay.
Okay, so now let's look at gamma E minus scattering cross section, gamma E minus to gamma E minus scattering cross section. The component scattering, that's number I have is about 0.67 times 10 to the minus 24 centimeter squared. So the rate of scattering is sigma times Ne times V, in this case is C, because one of them is a photon, right? So the relative velocity is C. So this is what you can calculate. Okay. So naively, one might expect, naive guess, or naive, is that photon freeze out, gamma freeze out, happens when sigma NEC is lambda dot over lambda. Okay, and if this is the case, you can easily calculate because NE we can calculate, well, we will calculate in next slide, right? Lambda dot over lambda we can calculate, so you can equate and see at what temperature this happens. Okay. But the first thing I want to point out that this is not quite correct. Okay, this needs modification. And that is because of something special that happens in this case, which we didn't encounter before. So let's consider again gamma E minus going to gamma E minus, right? This is the kind of interaction we are considering. So suppose gamma has energy of order T, right? Okay. And hence momentum of order T. Okay. E minus, the mass of the E minus is of course much larger than T. Okay, we are considering temperature range that is much smaller than the electron mass. Now imagine that there is a gamma which falls in and scatters. So the incoming gamma has momentum of order T. And this is more or less stationary, right? So it gets reflected, and this also has momentum of order T. Okay. So the electron gets a momentum of order T. And this translates to an energy of order. We can use the relativistic, non-relativistic formula, so let's write kinetic energy of order T square by ME. Right? I am using the P square by PM formula. So this means that the gamma transfers an energy of order T square by ME to P in one single collision. Okay, this is roughly the number. Now, in order for gamma to remain in thermal equilibrium at temperature T, the condition that we should impose is not that it has order 1 collision, okay, or larger than 1 collision per Hubble time, but that it should be able to transfer an energy of order T in Hubble time. Because if it undergoes elastic collision, okay, then the energy of gamma is not changing. So there is no way it can reach thermal equilibrium. But thermal equilibrium gives the energy distribution. So this is the condition that you have to impose, that we need. So we need gamma to transfer order T energy per Hubble time. Is this point clear?
So, but you could say the same thing for neutrons and protons, right? That's what I was asking you, because when neutrons and protons pick up, when the numbers become constant, we are still assuming that they are in thermal equilibrium. And
Yes.
but their masses are, neutrons and protons masses are very large.
But
And
there
I don't
are,
think-
okay, the point is there are the kind of collisions that we consider, right, which kept them in thermal equilibrium, are inelastic collisions, right? I mean this process, for example, N plus P going to D plus gamma, right? Here the energy change is of order of MeV, right?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's not just Compton scattering. So this, because this is in thermal equilibrium, this certainly changes energies of neutrons and protons by order 1 every time this happens. Is that okay? Is that clear? So it's not just elastic collision. Yeah, in an elastic collision, you have to have multiple collisions, but that, I mean, in fact, even that is not a problem here, right? You can do this calculation, right? So exercise. Okay, in fact, this calculation will be the same as that of a electron, more or less. That for neutrons and protons, N and P can remain in equilibrium even by elastic collision with gamma around MeV. Okay, because I mean, there is still large density of photons which can keep N and P in thermal equilibrium. Okay. See here, okay, I mean, maybe I can, this will also become clear in a few minutes perhaps. Okay. There are two issues which are different. Okay. One is where the gamma can be in thermal equilibrium. The other one is whether E minus can be in thermal equilibrium. For to see if E minus can be in thermal equilibrium, okay, or which is the analog of the question whether N and P can be in thermal equilibrium, we have to count the number of collisions per E minus, right? And that's huge because that's not suppressed by this number, because that is determined by N gamma, not by N E minus. So electrons, it's much easier for the electrons to be in thermal equilibrium with gamma than for gammas to be in thermal equilibrium by exchanging energy with electrons. Is this point clear?
Yeah, that I understand.
Okay. So because of this, when protons and neutrons are kept in a thermal bath, whether the protons and neutrons in thermal equilibrium, right? Even if you didn't include this process, right? You can check that protons and neutrons do remain in thermal equilibrium because there is a large number of photon density, right? And you are asking what is the average energy transfer to neutron or proton per Hubble time by collision of the photons. And so because N gamma is not suppressed by this 10 to the -9 factor, that will continue to happen. Okay. And as we will see here, that after the photons fall out of thermal equilibrium, the electrons and the electrons will still remain in thermal equilibrium by collision of the photons, and that is important because that's what we are going to use to determine the last scattering surface. Is this point clear?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so this is something we will discuss maybe today itself in a few minutes. Let's see if we can do that. So let me then. So okay. So then, what is the conclusion? What the conclusion is that since you need to transfer a energy of order T, right, we don't need one collision per Hubble time. Okay. We need ME over T collisions per Hubble time, right? Because you have to make this into T. Right? We need ME over T collisions per Hubble time. So the conclusion we need ME over T collisions per Hubble time.
So at what temperature is this decoupling happening?
It's about 10 to the
Photon
5 K.
decoupling.
We'll determine this just in a minute.
Okay.
Right? Let me write down the equation and that's what will determine. So basically the equation then is sigma NEC times divided by lambda dot over lambda. So that's square root of 8 pi G over 3 times half AB T to the 4. Okay, the same formula that you have been writing many times. 2 plus 6 times 7, 8 times. Now let me just write it as 4 over 11 to the power 4/3. right? Because T nu by Ta by this time has come down to settle down to its final value, 4/11 to the 1/3. So this should be equal to me over T. That's the decoupling time. Should be equal to, yes. Okay, because the number of collisions per Hubble time should be at least me over T. Okay. So any you can calculate. So let me write the formula for any. So any will be given by 0.87 times NB, right, which is 0.87 times omega B over MP times 3 H naught square over 8 pi G. Oh, and then T over T naught Q times T over T naught Q. Okay. So basically you have, once you take this T on this side, you have T squared in the numerator, and I'm sorry, T to the 4 in the numerator, because there is a T cube and then 1 over T on this side. So T to the 4 in the numerator and T square in the denominator. So you get T square equal to something, and then you just take the square root to determine T. Okay, so let me write the formula, final formula that we get. So exercise that we need T larger than 1.5 times 10 to the 4k times omega B H squared to the minus half. And once you put in the values of omega B as 0.04 and H as 0.7, right? H, you remember, is H naught we had parameterized as 100 H kilometer per second per megaparsec. That's H, small h. So this gives you of order 10 to the 5k. Okay. So this is the photon freeze out temperature. So below 10 to the 5k, okay, this is important. Below 10 to the 5k, okay, the photons go out of thermal equilibrium. Okay, so gamma goes out of thermal equilibrium. But it still scatters. It still has large number of scattering per Hubble time. Okay, it's just that the number is not enough to change its energy by order T. That's why it goes out of thermal equilibrium. But even if it goes out of thermal equilibrium, we know that T, so its energy distribution continues to follow Planck distribution formula. There's a black body distribution, Planck distribution formula with T of order 1 over lambda, T proportional to 1 over lambda, right? That's what happens to radiation after decoupling. Okay. So this is following Planck distribution formula, not because it's in thermal equilibrium, okay, but because it was in thermal equilibrium earlier, okay, and that continues to be the distribution even after it has decoupled. Is this clear? But at the same time, okay, E plus, E minus continues to exchange, continues to be in thermal equilibrium with the photon bath since the number of collisions of E minus is 10 to the 9 times that of gamma. Okay, that energy transfer, that means the energy transfer is also 10 to the 9 times that of gamma. So it clearly is in thermal equilibrium. So this is a somewhat peculiar situation, that the bath is not in thermal equilibrium. Bath simply follows the black body distribution because it was in thermal equilibrium earlier. But E minus, which is in contact with the bath, right? E minus and P. Okay, in fact, this is also true for P. Okay, even though the energy transfer in for P is about 1000 times lower, right? Because of this T square over MP. Okay, still it's good enough. Number of collisions is good enough to keep it in thermal equilibrium. So E minus and P are in thermal equilibrium with a bath, even though the bath itself is not in thermal equilibrium. Right? The bath just follows black body distribution formula. And because E minus and P are immersed in that bath, they are in thermal equilibrium at temperature T. Is this point clear? So this will be important because eventually when you discuss the formation of hydrogen out of E minus P combination, we'll use thermal equilibrium formula. Okay, at least as a first approximation. And again, as in nucleosynthesis, the full details require numerical analysis.
Sir,
Yes, go ahead, please.
sir, as you told that, sir, like the neutrino is going out, sorry, photon is going out thermal equilibrium. So that's mean like we are moving to matter-dominated era. Is it
No,
really
no,
or-
that's independent, right? Because
Okay.
matter domination means that when the energy densities are is dominated, energy density is dominated by matter. Right? Even if the photons go out of thermal equilibrium, they continue to contribute to the energy density, right? Because gravity doesn't care about whether the system is in thermal equilibrium or not, right? As long as it has energy, gravity sees it. So photon goes out of thermal equilibrium basically means that the photon is not exchanging energy with matter at a sufficiently high rate to keep it in thermal equilibrium. But nevertheless, it contributes to energy density, and that energy density at 10 to the 5K is still larger than the matter energy density. Right? In fact, photon, the matter radiation equality happens at about 10 to the 4K. So this is independent of the matter radiation equality.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Okay, this is like just the way the neutrino decoupled. Right?
Yes,
Even though the neutrinos continue to contribute to energy density,
yes,
the
sir.
photons decouple at this temperature.
Okay, okay. Okay.
Any other question?
So,
Yes, go ahead, please.
aren't we being a bit crude in saying that like either the photons are in equilibrium or they are like acting, even though they are interacting with electron and keeping the electrons in equilibrium, we are evolving them freely with and maintaining the Planck distribution.
Yeah, that's because the number of electrons is, as I said, it's 10 to the minus 9 times the number of photons, right? So it is true that they are not strictly in follow Planck distribution because they are exchanging some energy with the electron. But because the electron number is so little that its effect on the bath is negligible.
Then why don't we say that at this point the universe has gone transparent?
Because the number of scattering per Hubble time is still large, right? So at 10 to the 5K, you can estimate the number of scattering per Hubble time, right? It's basically this ME over T, right? Because at 10 to the 5K, where the decoupling happens, there is ME over T scattering per Hubble time. And ME over T, let's calculate this, right? ME over T will. So at 10 to the 5K, when T is 10 to the 5K, that's about 8.6 electron volt, right? Because yeah, 1 Kelvin is 8.6 10 to the minus 5. So 8.6 electron volt. So ME over T is 0.5 over 8.6, 0.5 times 10 to the 6. So that's about 10 to the 5. So at this time, okay, the photon is the energy exchange is low, okay, but the number of scattering is 10 to the 5 times in a Hubble time, and that's why the universe is not transparent.
I mean, is this number large?
10 to the 5, yeah, it's a large number, right?
I mean, this is just the number of collisions happening in the universe.
At the Hubble time, which means that the photon that we see from that era, right? Suppose we are to see such photons, right?
Yeah.
That photon would have scattered 10 to the 5 times of the order of 10 to the 5 times before it reaches us, right? So what you are seeing is not an image of the universe at this era, right?
Is this the number of collisions per photon?
Yes, this is the number of collisions. Each photon
Yeah.
undergoes 10 to the 5 collisions, right? Because this number was how many times the photon collides. See, this number was a collision per photon, right? Where did he do this calculation? Yeah, we are calculating, not even here earlier. Yes, this number, right? We are multiplied by NE, right? Which means that the photon, we are counting number of collisions per photon. Because you have used electron density, right? So how many times the photon scatters, and that's still 10 to the 5, even though NE is small. So that's the reason the universe hasn't gone transparent, because it's still a lot of scattering. Each photon undergoes so many scattering in a Hubble time.
Yet it does not exchange enough energy to maintain equilibrium.
Yeah, because you need 10 to the 5 collisions to exchange energy of order T, right? So at this temperature, it barely manages. But once the temperature falls below this, the number of collisions is not enough to exchange enough energy. Yeah, and that's because of this large ratio, right? ME over T is a large number. So because each exchange gives you an energy, exchange energy, that is a fraction, T over ME fraction of the temperature, right? It's C square over ME. So the fraction is T over ME. And because T over ME is a small number, we have this problem, that it doesn't exchange enough energy, even though there are lots of scattering.
I mean, even after this, let's say we have an order of magnitude lower temperature at 10 to the 4 Kelvin.
Even
I
that
have
doesn't
photon-
help. But okay, we'll see that decoupling happens at 10 to the 3 Kelvin.
Yeah, I'm just hypothesizing that a photon that was present at 10 to the 4 Kelvin is not in equilibrium,
Yes,
but is still undergoing a collisions of the order 10 to the what?
say 10 to the 4. Okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, will I not see those today? Because those still have enough energy, right?
Those still have, no, because we'll see them today, of course, right? But the point is they would have scattered there many times, right? See,
Yes.
when is something not transparent, right? I mean, if you shine a light from behind a semi-transparent object, for example, right? The photon is going to scatter many times through that object and then reach you, right? But you don't see anything on the other side. Right? That's why you call it not transparent, right? It's not giving us the state of the universe. We don't, suppose we observe a photon, right? Today, we don't know which direction it was moving when it started its life, right? At which point it was there. It was when it started its life, because it has undergone so many scattering. We'll call the universe transparent if it comes to us directly from the source without undergoing a single scattering. Because if it scatters even once, right, we lose the information about where it's coming from, which direction it was moving at the time that we want to study, right? So when you say that we see the image of the CMB sky today, right? That the CMB gives you the image at 10 to the 3 Kelvin. Is that after that, Okay, the photon has never scattered. Most of the photons that you are seeing today have never scattered from anything.
But why aren't the earlier photons polluting this data? I mean,
Oh, because earlier photons are getting scattered, right? And eventually, the last scattering takes place at 10 to the 3K. Is the earlier photons which you are seeing today. Okay? But the last scattering that the earlier photons underwent is at 10 to the 3K. That's what we are seeing today.
okay.
Okay. So when we are seeing that we are seeing the image of the universe as 10 to the 3K, right? Doesn't mean that the photons that we are seeing, right, actually are produced at 10 to the at that time, 10 to the 3K, right? They must have been produced much earlier. But they scattered many times in between. And the last time they scattered is at 10 to the 3K.
Okay. And at that time also, the universe was isotropic and all.
Yeah, as you will see that there's a small fluctuation which basically produced our galaxies. Okay? But it was homogeneous and isotropic to 1 in 10 to the 5. Yeah, that's the kind of fluctuation that existed in the universe at that time.
Okay.
Okay, any other question?
Hello, sir.
Yes, go ahead, please.
I was asking, are we, let's say, if we are studying some perturbation on the metric that we are using,
Yeah.
are we going to, I mean, I was trying to ask how black holes form, but like, if we study some fluctuation around the metric, are we going to use something like statistical mechanics to study those fluctuations?
No, typically, okay, the way this is studied that you don't need to consider statistical mechanics anymore. You suppose you have some small fluctuation in the metric, right? Then what would happen is that then you just evolve them according to classical Einstein's equations, right? The combined equation of matter and metric. And what's going to happen is that the small fluctuations in the metric will grow because if the gravitational potential is a little low in some place, right, it will attract more matter. So the potential will become even lower. Right? That's the way the fluctuations grow. And as long as it's linear, you can do the analysis reasonably easily, right? Because you are just solving linearized Einstein's equation coupled to matter. But eventually, if you want to really study formation of galaxies or the black hole at the center of the galaxy, then of course the linear analysis will not hold anymore, right? Then it becomes non-linear. So once the fluctuations become of order 1, then there's no sense in which you can do a linear analysis. And that's where the numerical methods come in, right? You have to basically evolve these combined equations of matter and gravity numerically to eventually see the formation of galaxies and superclusters and black holes and so on.
So, I mean, to when at what time these fluctuations start to grow? I mean, till now we are assuming that everything is quite uniform.
Yeah. So they grow a much later stage. So that part we are not going to discuss. As I think last time Kaustuv also asked that we'll stop at last scattering surface, right, where the densities were still, the fluctuations are still 1 in 10 to the 5. They grow much later. Once the stars and galaxies start forming, that's of the order of the kind of time scale that we have, right? Billions of years, for example.
Okay.
So this happens much later. Okay? And in fact, I mean, what happens is that, I mean, once these fluctuations start to grow and you form stars and galaxies, right? Then the light from the star reionizes the universe, right? Basically, it kicks out the electrons out of the hydrogen atom. But by that time, the densities have fallen so low that the CMB still doesn't scatter. Even though there are free electrons floating around, the CMB doesn't scatter, and that's why the universe remains transparent. Okay, even though everything becomes ionized again. But those part, that aspect, as I said, we will not discuss. This course will end at last scattering. So it's the history of the universe between inflation and last scattering is what we are going to study.
But these fluctuations are also important at the time of inflation, right? And that's what
Yes.
created
So they are produced at the time of inflation, okay? But they are very small. So there, the linear analysis is good enough. The nonlinear analysis is important only later, after way after the last scattering surface.
But
So we'll do the linear analysis of these fluctuations. Right? Indeed, they are produced at the time of inflation, and that's what leaves the imprint at the CMB sky.
But we still have these primordial black holes. So how are they formed?
Well, it's not clear that we do have, right? It's just a theory that during the evolution of the universe, at some point, right, the dynamics might have been such that it formed some black holes. Right? But I mean, there is no real concrete evidence that we do have those primordial black holes in our universe today. Okay, it's just that possibility exists that you could have primordial black holes.
Yeah.
Any other question?
Sir?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Sir, could you please telling about something like hot dark matter or cool dark matter? Is it same like when we discussed earlier? They are different or?
Yeah, dark matter, of course, we don't know what it is. Right?
Okay.
We'll discuss later the dark matter production mechanism, right, or what it could be. But at this stage, all you know and all you are using, in fact, I mean, during this time, dark matter is not important, right? Before the matter domination starts,
okay,
right? I mean, nowhere the dark matter has affected anything that we have done, right?
okay. So like when we say the neutrino as massive, so they will contribute to the dark matter.
No, neutrino contribution is very low because they are like radiation, right? Their contribution to energy density today is like what the photon contributes.
Okay.
So those we are not thinking of as dark matter.
Okay.
Right? Because those you understand well within the standard model, right?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll continue next time. I'll send out a message asking when the next time will be.
Sir, I had a QFT question.
Yes. Okay, now let me just first stop this, then we'll continue the QFT question.